All right, guys, welcome back to Beard of Darkness Folk Reviews. Today is a special one, folks. I've been very excited about this for some time now. And how are you tonight, Adrian Tchaikovsky?
I am very well, thank you very much. Yes, I
Happy to-
opened a bookshop today, as in cut a ribbon for the first time in my life. That was a weird experience.
That's incredible. That is incredible. So we'll definitely have to touch on that. So real quick, is it? Well, not real quick. We're live. We're having fun. So was it local to you? Is it?
Yeah, so it was the Oxfam bookshop, which is like a charity book secondhand bookshop in a place called Skipton, quite near where I live. And the manager is an old friend, so it wasn't exactly sort of they sought me out across the world or anything like that. But yeah, that was a weird thing to be asked to do, but very flattering.
Yes. Oh my goodness, that's so cool. I tell my wife all the time, and we live in kind of not a small town, but it is a small town feel. And it would be so fun to just kind of follow that passion and open one up and see how it goes. Walk into the store and just, hey, I'm a kid in a candy shop for a little bit, kind of feeling. So a little story. When I first started picking books up, period. I had been hearing a lot about Children of Time, and I usually don't get too into the blurb before I pick up a book, and it usually plays to my advantage, as in many ways. And that book for me was Children of Time, and it opened my mind to a lot of, well, themes and where a story could take you. And I'm trying to profound. I think that's a great word for it. And of course, with the Arthur C. Clarke Award winning Children of Time, that's amazing. How was it winning that special award?
I mean, it was absolutely transformative, if nothing else, because I mean, at that point, I was a modestly, but not particularly successful fantasy author. And I'd written this sci-fi book as a bit of a jolly, and my publishers had kind of grudgingly put it out. And honestly, it hadn't made any kind of impact. And then even just from the shortlisting on the Clarks, it started to turn up on people's radars, and people started. I got the first inkling. Oh, people really like this book, which hadn't really happened until that, because I just think it had been very much a background thing. And I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just quite aside from the fact that actually you start to get an impression, actually, I really managed to hit something with this book that people are really sort of vibing with. Just professionally, it was absolutely transformational, because it made me much more of a known figure in the genre. And, I mean, it eventually paved the way for me to go full time as a writer and all of that sort of thing.
That's very inspiring in many ways, but especially that last part. I talked to a lot of authors where that's the goal. That full-time, and Tim McKay, my guy, he's a wonderful indie author. That is the dream right there. And I hear that, hey, I want to do this full-time, follow my passions. So to hear the story and kind of be a little bit of part of knowing what you did to reach that goal of yours has been really cool. Again, I hear so many people, I want to write full time, and I don't know really what I'm trying to say by that, but it's often the goal, and to hear somebody who has successfully done that is incredible. What influenced you doing that series?
So, I mean, I have always had a fondness for insects and spiders and generally things like that, which shows him from my earliest writing, because the Shadows of the Apt fantasy series is a series about people with insect powers, and there's lots of insect themes going on. And most of my writing touches on the natural world in general, which has always been a great love of mine. In the case of Children of Time in particular, there is some real world research by a New Zealand scientist, Fiona Cross, who has looked at the behavioral capabilities of portiaed jumping spiders and found that, yes, they are actually insanely smart in a sense that that is recognizable by humans, for something which basically doesn't even really have a brain. In particular, they have an incredibly complex set of behaviors. They demonstrate object permanence, which is the thing that humans don't actually have when we're born. We have to develop it. They are just very, very smart. And this is one thing behavioral science is having a bit of a big expansion phase at the moment, and we're discovering that pretty much wherever you look, animals are actually a lot more complicated for their brain size than they were previously supposed to be. And I've even seen theories that suggest that yes, we have an enormous brain as humans for our body size, but actually maybe it's just not very well laid out, and that some animals just have a much more organized brain. And so in this case, having read this research, I was wondering, right, I would like to do a thought experiment of, well, what if this spider was able to evolve to become the dominant species, to become a fully sapient species, to develop a society? What would that look like? And so the whole book is really an excuse for me to run that thought experiment, for which I kind of had to throw some humans into the mix to make a plot out of it.
That speaks very much to my experience with it. So you start out, and I love the sci-fi vibe, this huge ship that we're hearing about and some little subplots going on. But then I start reading Portia, and it's just, I can absolutely tell with 100% and without even knowing who you were and your research that this was based in it, because it just takes you on a journey. You learn, and your imagination takes you in a place, for me personally, it had never been before. Behavior being the main topic for me. As you see Portia and this journey and these many subplots that come along with that character, it's wonderful. And it influenced me in my future reads a whole lot. So that's 3 books, and I absolutely love that. I haven't made it to number 2 yet, but that is on my 2024 reading schedule. I'm very excited.
Well, I'm planning to write book 4 at some point this year, so
that's exciting. And as an author, that has to be the most exciting part, knowing people are just like, "Oh, Adrian, I just can't wait." How is that feeling for you?
It's grand. I mean, the thing is, it's I never ever wrote just for my own pleasure. I think a lot of this comes out of having a kind of a tabletop gaming background, and so all my early creativity was very much designing things for people to experience as a games master. And so when I was writing, I was very much writing to be read. And obviously the fact that I now feel, I've got an audience there who are ready for it. And, in the case, any given series, if I do end up writing another book in a series, I kind of know, right, there are enough people who have loved the earlier books that I know they'll kind of be keen for news of this one. I mean, it's one thing I was talking, at this bookshop business, I was talking to people and mentioning stuff that was on the horizon. And if you've got someone who turns up with, say, a copy of Dogs of War, and I can tell them, well, I'm writing like the 3rd Dogs of War book at the moment, it's always, it's just always fun to see people's reactions.
Right? Is it that, were you young when you started to love entomology and insects? And
yeah, I mean, I grew up on nature documentaries. Anyway, David Attenborough and so forth. They were always the TV programs I was allowed to stay up late to watch by my parents. But also I grew up, as I suspect a lot of us did, a very disaffected kid who didn't really fit in a lot of ways. And the way that manifested with me was I kind of took as my tribe, so to speak, insects and spiders and reptiles, and in genre stuff, the aliens and the robots, and generally the stuff you're not supposed to like, the things that are generally get the PR, the bad PR. And those were the things that I've always felt were very me. And I kind of built on that. And I genuinely find insects and spiders and so forth very aesthetically appealing. And if there's a sci-fi thing, I'm always about the aliens or the robots or whatever it is that's not the kind of the square-jawed zap gun hero or whatever you're supposed to be actually relating to. So I think it's almost like a neurodivergence marker that I feel it's
like
kind
putting
of
them together.
I'm waving the banner for the things that don't have banners of their own. Yeah.
And I think so many people, that's so much important to me, because, and I know so many other people as well, because a lot of those ideas weren't tried a lot before you did it so well. And,
yeah, I mean, it's certainly, I'm certainly not the only person who has gone there with a non-antagonistic take on insect stuff. I mean, one of the things when Children of Time did start to get momentum, a lot of people said, you know, were you inspired by A Deepness in the Sky, Werner Vinge, for example? And I hadn't read it then, and I'm very glad, because I probably wouldn't have written the book if I had, because there's enough kind of commonality, and it's a brilliant book, and it has a very interesting take on, in this case, entirely alien species which are very spider-like. And I would have, if I'd run into it earlier, I would have loved it, because I'm always up for a nuanced treatment that isn't just sort of arachnophobia in space.
So, as a young man, or whenever you started really loving literature, what were some of those foundational authors, and if there's specific books too, because I'd really like to write them down.
So I mean, I've certainly gone through phases. I mean, very early on, I think when I was very, very young, the writer that really kindled the love of reading in me was Terence Dicks, because I cut my teeth on the Doctor Who novelizations. I was a huge Doctor Who fan from quite a young age, and the library always just had this apparently endless selection of books. So every time you would go down to the library on a week, there would be a whole bunch of others that you'd never seen before. And obviously, I came into Doctor Who like mid Tom Baker run, which meant there was a huge amount that had been and gone. And obviously in those days, you could not get hold of this stuff. So the books were really the only way to experience it. I mean, later on, I've always been, from that point, an enormously voracious reader. And I would basically grab whatever looked like it was genre stuff that was put in front of me, which meant I picked up an awful lot of spy thrillers with like scorpions on the cover. Oh, this is a book about scorpions. And it was not. It was a book about spies. And it was very, very disappointing to me.
That's funny.
I mean, weirdly, I think we may talk at some point about did you always want to be a writer? And
yes, that's actually playing right into my next question.
Let's, I mean, to move to that through another writer who's had another couple of writers who had an enormous amount of influence on me. Yes, I did not always want to be a writer, but my creativity when I was a teenager, like I say, was tabletop role-playing games, and that was very much where I fit in the world of making stuff up. And then I ran into Weiss and Hickman's Dragonlance books. And they were someone's Dungeons and Dragons campaign that they had turned into novels. And it was just this light bulb moment of, oh God, I could do that. That is a thing I could potentially do from where I am now. It was just this roadmap. And from that point, I said, right, I would like to be a writer. And I have never not wanted to be a writer from that point. But I was about, I think, 16, 17 when that happened.
Wow. And I can see how, as somebody who hasn't dipped into the tabletop games, because when I got interested, which I still am, I had 4 kids, which there's much proof for. Rewind about 3 minutes. But when I do have that time, very much going to be my next hobby I go grab. The storytellers that I talk with, where that's a huge influence.
An awful lot of writers of my generation, and even the previous sort of generation, so people like George R. R. Martin, for example, they've come up through role-playing games, or they've been role-playing gamers alongside writing. And there are some really solid transferable skills. So what I was able to bring to the table straight away was the world creation and character inhabiting elements you get as a player, and especially as a games master of these sort of games. And this is another reason my creative process is extremely world first and world heavy, and it's kind of how you would sit down to start a role-playing games campaign.
That is, as my viewers will know, that's a little nugget of gold that's part of your process, which is very much what I'm always after.
My caveat there is also every writer I know has a different process, and it's very much the advice is you've got to find the one that works for you. But that's certainly, I always start with the world and build up.
And I love that take, because as I go through as a very beginning writer, I want to hear those differences of process and how you got there, because it's very valuable to me. It gives me options. So hey, if I'm not really feeling this, I got this story, and that person's personal process is very different from maybe the next guy, and I would love to try that. And another point about the role-playing games, and you said your generation of writers.
Yeah.
It's that time in history where we didn't have the internet for everything. You didn't have a bunch of super realistic games, and you had to make your own fun. What a better way.
And also, I think an awful lot of writers I know, and possibly even just the majority of writers I know, are basically oddball characters of a certain. So yeah, they're not. They don't fit easily into a particular shaped hole. There's a lot of neurodivergency. There's a lot of eccentricity. One of the which tends to manifest in many cases is in just not being very socially adept. And one of the things that role-playing games are very good for is getting people who are not terribly socially adept into a social environment. And for me, it's always the fact that when you are playing a role, you're not being yourself, and therefore a lot of your anxieties don't necessarily come through. But various people gain from it in various ways. But it's I think that's one reason why, as a hobby, it is so valuable, and it appeals so much to a certain type of person.
And those are oftentimes my favorite characters. The one that makes me go, I like that little quirk, or that's different, because to me, normal's boring. I am attracted to those people that there's something different about their life than mine. I love culture for that reason. And hearing of cultures is a very big reason. Differences of culture shows us different kinds of morals. I mean, it gets really deep if you think about it, and you explore those kinds of themes. And I absolutely adore that. So role-playing games on the list for sure. Cannot wait. What's your favorite?
I've always kind of ended up going back to Dungeons and Dragons in various incarnations. At the moment, I'm becoming very taken with a very mutable system called Forged in the Dark. We started with the Angel Blades in the Dark, but now has an awful lot of different games in different genres and settings that use it.
I hear it's quite a complex market of different. You get Kickstarter, especially. That's one place you can go to find so many new things.
Yep, and it can be very difficult to work out what you're necessarily buying into with Kickstarter. I mean, certainly I've had a lot of I've backed quite a lot of stuff on Kickstarter. I've had some extremely good things, and occasionally I've had some extremely disappointing things where you basically get through a pamphlet 3.5 years later and you think, this doesn't feel quite like what I contracted for. But on the other hand, that is also built into the crowdfunding model, that you're not always going to get a thing at all, let alone quite the thing you thought you were getting.
And I've actually kind of been wanting to hear if that's a realistic part of Kickstarter, because I've been on Kickstarter for a while. I've checked it out for quite some time. I've only backed one thing. Very excited. Rob J. Hayes, God Eater, the trilogy of trilogies doing. But so I'm excited for that. But my experience goes there and stops. I have not done much on Kickstarter, and you get that disclaimer. It's like, hey, this isn't guaranteeing you anything. So it's maybe my thought of going into Kickstarter was different than it actually is, and I think everybody should be aware of that potential.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the stuff I backed, I think I've had far more good results than bad. But I mean, there is definitely an appreciable fraction which have just fizzled and are patently never going to be concluded. And there's a smaller fraction that when they actually deliver, you're getting something that feels rushed or badly put together, or and a lot of the time, obviously these are frequently multi-year projects to bring to fruition by people who are not necessarily kind of natural business people or organizers, and also just life gets in the way a lot of the time. So I think you've got to go in saying, basically I would like this thing to happen, therefore here is my donation to bring it about, and ideally you'll get the thing in the fullness of time, which can be quite a lot of time. But and obviously we've had supply issues and pandemics and all sorts of stuff over the last few years which have complicated things even further. But I think you've got to step away from this entitlement of, well, I want my thing now, because it is absolutely there very, very, you have to tick a little box to understand. I understand this thing may not actually happen.
And I love that that tool is available for the reason it's available. You see so many successful, whether it's an invention, there's publishing, and then you've got the board games. And I think there's some other topics that I haven't explored too far. But it's a game changer in some ways. And I think it started with like Brandon Sanderson.
Well, Brandon, I mean, that's it. Yeah, I mean, Sanderson obviously famously kickstarted a series of books with a truly sort of unprecedented level of backing. I mean, it's interesting. I will tell you for free that every single genre writer in the Western Hemisphere was bombarded by people for the next 3 weeks saying, "So, are you going to do that then?"
Yeah.
And I think it was John Scalzi wrote a really incisive post as to why Sanderson was in a sort of a unique position to take advantage of the crowdfunding, but both because of the effectively the machinery he could call into being, and he's the most or one of the most read fantasy authors in the world, and therefore he's got more of a guaranteed audience than just about anyone except maybe Martin.
Okay, yeah, and that's a huge point, and I'm glad you covered that because I really wasn't sure how to take his his experience, because before what he did, because I mean, I'll admit what he did is the reason I know of Kickstarter. It just was on like the fantasy booktubes, and I was watching a lot of that, and I was hearing of it, and I said, I'm going to check that out. So, I think he did something really unique again, and I agree with your point of his position in it. But I think it also opened up the opportunity that people maybe weren't aware of. So I think that's
awesome. I mean, it's always good to have another toolkit, basically, another way of getting something done. And I mean, I think it's one of those, if you're going to crowdfund something on Kickstarter or on whatever, I recommend a lot of research into how it works, what your actual costs are. I mean, there have been a number of quite high-profile projects that have been sunk early on in the Kickstarter's history, for example, because people did not figure in things like shipping, and stuff like that. I mean, I think some of the early actual Kickstarter-related lawsuits were because someone had made all the stuff and then found they just didn't have the money to physically get it to people. And obviously at that point, it becomes rather more concrete as far as, well, actually, you've done it. It's kind of your responsibility. You were the one that set the targets and budgeted anything.
I could see how that would be a lot of pressure too. These certain things happen to my campaign, and there's a reality to this. And yeah, it's complex at that level. So I'm curious, so when you started querying, and that's, again, a very beginner word for me. I have beginner knowledge of what that means. What was that like for you, trying to find a publisher?
I mean, all right, so I was writing books for 15 years before getting an agent.
Wow.
In which time I had almost zero progress. The last two books before Empire in Black and Gold got a little bit of more personalized feedback, but before that it was very much the standard, we're not looking for books at the moment, or this is not the sort of book we're looking for, or whatever, and just very much form responses. So I mean, what it was like, it was becoming almost kind of mental health threatening levels of frustration and disappointment. I had basically decided, right, if I do not get anywhere by age 35, I am just going to throw the whole thing in and give up. And I do not know whether I would have done it or not, but I got my first positive response from an agent 2 weeks before my 35th birthday.
Oh my goodness. Having that rule. Oh, sorry. That rule in your mind, and then that happening for you. That must have been
it was. And then the problem is, what you don't realize as a querying author is, how slow the querying process works, because by that point you're intimately familiar with it. You don't realize everything in traditional publishing works that slowly. So it's it takes a while for anything to happen. And then your agent is kind of shopping the book around in a very crowded marketplace, and you don't understand, right, it's going to be 6 months, it's going to be 9 months, it's going to be a year. Who knows? And possibly it's just their agent will come back and say, yes, I really like this book, but no one's biting.
Sure. And is that what shopping around means? Because I've heard that a few times.
Yeah. So basically, once your agent has agreed to represent you, they will use their web of contacts in the industry and set up meetings and talk about books. And I mean, what this was, the fantasy market at this point was very, very lively, but it was very crowded. This is like we are in the early years of the big success of Game of Thrones, of the Malazan books, there are a lot of big names, and the situation was like, there is no room for another series at this point. None of the publishers were willing to commit. Weirdly enough, the thing that swung it was because I had felt this was going to be my last shot before I basically potentially gave it up. Rather than just writing book one, I had written what effectively turned out to be the first 4 books of the Shadows of the App series before submitting book one, because I knew if I submitted book one, I would never write the others if it just got rejected. And therefore I was like, right, I want to finish the whole plot arc purely for my own satisfaction, and then I will submit book one. And what happened was my agent was able to say, well, look, these books are written. You're not going to have to wait a year and a half for book two. You can submit these books within a few months of each other. And build that kind of momentum and that brand recognition, or whatever, however they phrase it. And that was what swung it, and it kind of got me crowbarred onto the list with Tor UK, Pan Macmillan, and the books did well enough that they somehow allowed me to get 10 of the wretched things out. But it is. I mean, and that's kind of what your agent is doing, and your agent ideally knows the industry in its absolute current moment well enough to know what it is about your book that they can say that's going to make it give it just that extra little kind of dusting of sugar for the publisher to make, maybe we will give this one a go.
I love the insight, and I want to say that I appreciate you sharing that, because that's a very intimate process for an author, going through it. And so thank you for sharing it. A lot of those points were questions to me, and now I understand it. What I'm really excited to ask you is, you've got this wonderful sounding, and I'm sure it will be, novel coming out called Service Model, and I'm so anxious to hear about it from the man himself.
So I mean, so Service Model is weirdly, it's a book where the idea lands very well with people, but the idea that's landing is not quite the book. So it's a book about a robot servant, a robot valet, in fact, that murders its master and goes on the run, which sounds like kind of rogue killer robot narrative. Except that what's actually going on is the only thing this robot wants to do is get another position as a valet. And it ends up kind of being dropped out of the system and discovers that the entire world, the human world that is kind of robot supported, is falling apart. There is just a general collapse of society going on. And the world is full of robots that are trying to be the things that they were made to be, in a world that doesn't need those things anymore. Because who needs a robot valet when you're basically in a Mad Max kind of dystopian post-apocalypse? And so it is it's Mad Max, except instead of Max, you've got C-3PO. Or the other one for Dune fans, it's putting the butler in Butlerian Jihad.
There it is. From Adrian Tchaikovsky himself, man. Oh, it's so exciting.
But the other thing, it's also, as often is the case when I'm writing about very, very bleak things, like in this case, the complete collapse of human and robot society, is hopefully people will find it very funny, because it is one of the most comedic things I've written, in quite a Douglas Adamsy sort of vein, because otherwise it would be so bleak. And this is how I tend to go, is the more I'm writing about things that are absolutely horrible, the more I will adopt a kind of a a light-hearted tone, because that kind of makes it tolerable, I think, to read.
And I think that's a wonderful trait to have, you know, in those situations, to be able to pull that out. And I'm really excited for that aspect of your writing, because that's something I haven't experienced of your writing. I know I love your prose, and to hear of just kind of a comedic side to your work is very enticing. So when does that drop?
I believe that is May to June. I can't remember the specific dates. I think it's coming out roughly simultaneously UK and US. It's actually a US first publication, so it's a Tor.com book from the US, and in the UK, Pan Macmillan, who are kind of the UK wing of Tor, have taken on the distribution.
So guys, I do have in the description that pre-order link, so you don't have to go searching for it. It's right there below us. So you've written for a while, you've been a writer for a while, and have a lot of novels, and I love that. A nice set of work that people can dive into and enjoy. And people like me who thoroughly enjoy your prose, we have a lot to get to, and that's exciting. Having that process and that experience of having such a long list of work, what is it that has you coming back time and time again as a writer?
I mean, two things really. The kind of the utopic one is basically, I have so many more stories to tell. I've got an enormous backlog of things I want to do, subgenres I want to explore, just ideas I want to turn into worlds and just run around and see where they go. The other thing is I can go about 2 weeks without writing something new, and it doesn't count editing. It doesn't count non-prose writing, like I've done a bit of game work and all that sort of thing. I can go about 2 weeks, and then I get enormously twitchy. I pushed it just before Christmas. I finished off a manuscript and submitted it in the first week of December. And I thought, right, I'm not going to do anything until the new year. And it was very, very hard. So I think writing new stuff is a very intrinsic part of how my mind works. Which I don't think is actually psychologically healthy to have that kind of reliance on it, but it is commercially convenient.
Oh, I like how you said that. Wow, yes. Oh my goodness. Of course, it's like you write or something, bro. No, that's awesome. I love that. It's not something you'd recommend because there's down points to it. But
I mean, I think it's probably healthier if you can put it down and pick it up at your absolute volition, rather than basically being dragged back to it by almost like a dependence on that. I think I have very much linked my own self-worth with the fact that I do this, because honestly, this is the thing that has worked. It's the thing that I wanted to do for many years, and then it's the thing that has really, really worked for me.
So guys, I didn't mean to interrupt you. So sometimes there's a lag and it happens. But what I was saying is, it's very appreciated is, I think, the word, when I hear such intimate detail of somebody's personal process, because guys, that's brave. I mean, and I think that it has a lot more validity in so many other people's experience as a writer. There's so many other people that I'm sure can relate with that. So to share it is awesome. And
I mean, actually, I will throw in, there is actually a third reason, third answer to why do you keep writing is, I really enjoy writing. I am not at any point a writer who would say, oh yes, it's a terrible, terrible sort of tortuous process, and then eventually you come up, you crawl out of the earth clutching the diamond of your manuscript. I just, the actual process of creation is something that I get a tremendous amount of joy in. You can really, really like writing. It doesn't have to be a chore. It doesn't have to be a torment. It can be fun, and you can still be a successful writer doing that. And I think that's a very important thing, because there is this narrative of the tortured artist, and it is a very problematic narrative that I think people need to get away from. And all right, if you're an artist and you're tortured and you make good art, that's fine, but it's not actually an absolute prerequisite to being a creator of any sort.
Sure, thank you. And I really appreciate again you sharing that. And that's a very real part of writing for a lot of people. And so, say to the aspiring science fiction writer plans to get published is very much a part of their idea of what's next for them. Again, I
Mhm.
apologize, guys.
No,
Uh,
we're good. We're good.
we got a bunch of snow the other day, and the babysitter is not able to be gotten to. So
Ah,
I appreciate you guys uh, getting through it. But so for the guy or girl that is a science fiction or writer, period, aiming to be published, what is that piece of advice that you would give them?
so this is a really tough one. I get the question, and I'm not going to talk about writing process particularly because everyone's process is very, very different. There are writers I know who are absolutely top-notch, excellent writers who work in completely different ways to me. I think the big thing to understand is there are things you have power over and there are things you don't. You do not have power over what the publishers are looking for. You do not have power over what the market can bear, what any individual editor is going to like. All of these things are completely outside your control. You have a power over what you submit. So, I mean, one of the things I discovered, obviously, I 15 years trying to get published. How did they not recognize? Did they not recognize my genius? This was all gold dust. And then I went back through my back catalogue, and I've been able to salvage 2 books out of 15 because I was writing about a book a year, and the rest were just not up to standard. It would have taken far more work to salvage anything from those books rather than just write new stuff. I was not a very good person at taking criticism. If you can find a good, reliable source of feedback on your writing, it is very hard to take feedback on your writing. But if you are predisposed to be able to do so, then that's going to probably shave some time off that waiting period. But basically, getting whatever you submit, make it as good as it can be, so that when the roll of the dice comes up and it is in front of the right editor at the right time, who has a slot to fill and has had a nice lunch and is feeling well disposed to the world, the thing they read is good. And the thing they read is polished. And also the thing they read is yours. It is very tempting to follow the zeitgeist. You say, there's loads of books of this type being published. I will write a book of that type. There are 2 big problems with that. First of all, by the time you finished writing the book of that type, probably that zeitgeist has been and gone. Certainly by the time it gets to the publisher, certainly by the time it might actually get into print, because publishing takes time. And also, the other thing is, everyone else has had that thought. That publisher will have seen 500 manuscripts basically trying to do that thing. Write the book that only you can write, and you will not be competing with anyone on those kind of grounds.
That is, I'm sorry. I was just saying that is the best answer I've ever gotten for that question. You cut well for a lot of reasons. You covered those things in life that we cannot control. So to worry or stress or get those stomach aches over things you can't control is not worth it. So I'm glad you covered that for me and for so many others. And then those things that you can control, do it as best as you can when you submit it. And I love that. And I think it plays into us being self-critical. I think you mentioned those of us who are like good at taking criticism. I don't know. Does that exist, humans? I don't think so.
I think that there are probably very rare and balanced people who are able to hear it with equanimity. But I mean, I think it's there's a middle ground where you get the reaction of, well, I will stomp off now and be very, very angry about what you've just said. And then you think about it and eventually, oh, no, they're right. I really do need to do that. And receiving edits on my books now, after like 17 years in the business, I still get that occasionally. I still get the editor will say this, and I say, no, how dare you? This is my child. This is my beautiful creation. And then a few days later, I think, yeah, it does need doing, doesn't it?
I can understand why that would be difficult. I mean, for me personally, especially, I am very bad at it, guys. It's like, oh, you're not driving so good today. It's like, oh, you know, and I would stress out about that. So I feel like for me personally, that would be a learned skill. And after 17 years, I can see how that is something that is part of that process. So are you reading anything right now? Anything that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually currently on a book called Stormblood by Jeremy Schall, which is a kind of espionage, military, far future space sci-fi, which is very, very punchy. I'm having a lot of fun with that.
I love a punchy prose, right in the like throat. It's like, give me a prose that I you know, maybe as a palate cleanser, because I really do stick with fantasy or sci-fi. That gives me a nice punch in the throat, and then I'm excited to get on to the next one, you know? So I totally appreciate the punchy vibe that you're telling me that you're reading right now. So for you personally right now, what are you working on, and kind of what's next for you?
Oh, God, Lord. I was trying to put together a kind of a schedule of what I might be writing in the future, based on. So my agent is about to do a new round of pitching for a next sort of set of contracts.
Oh my
for future
gosh.
stuff. So this is all quite putative. So, but at the moment, I'm writing a third book in the sequence that started with Dogs of War, for Head of Zeus. I mean, I've already got there are about, I think, 5 or 6 books that I have finished and submitted that haven't really seen the light of day yet, that will get announced at some point over the next couple of years. I'm quite a way ahead of schedule. After that, probably it will be Children Book 4.
Very excited for that one.
But between then and now, so I've got, as well as this year, as well as Service Model, there is a book called Alien Clay coming out a couple of months earlier, from Pan Macmillan in the UK and Orbit in the US, which is my very, very weird alien ecology book, and also alien ecology, human politics book. And as well,
You're an ambitious guy.
Sorry?
You're an ambitious guy.
Yeah, well, I mean, the year after, there's a book which is currently has no accepted title because we're wrangling over it, but it's another alien ecology book that's even weirder. Yes. And then I've got a near future solar punk detective noir book starring a raccoon.
Oh, right, that is amazing. That's the best pitch I've ever heard.
It was a weird ass thing to write, I can tell you.
I cannot wait, Adrian. Oh my goodness, that's exciting. So, do you do a lot of conventions?
I do. I mean, actually, this year I've got a crazy number of conventions on. So, I traditionally I do the 2 big UK conventions, EasterCon and FantasyCon. Beyond that, I tend to go where I'm invited. I do a few. There are a few other UK ones. I kind of go on my own. There's an Edinburgh one in Scotland called Chimera, and I'm going along. Worldcon this year is in Glasgow, so I'm hopefully there. But also this year, I've have quite a few European engagements. So I may be in Germany. I'm going to be in Norway. I'm going to be in Poland. I'm going to be in Spain.
Oh my God.
Which is far, far more than I've ever had in one year. So it's going to be really quite a crazy year for just traveling around. I'll be probably traveling around with laptop, furiously writing in my off moments.
That is, man. So to me, okay, I understand why a lot of people hear, hey, I'm a full-time writer, and that's the dream. I get that. I really do. And that's very cool. But then I hear your story of, I go to a lot of conventions. I get to talk about my babies that I create. And I get to tell people about them and get them excited for it. And that's the dream. If I was to call something the dream, that's it. You're a writer full-time. You get to talk about your work, and then travel, something I've always wanted to do. You're going to be in my neck of the woods as far as my ancestors, my 2 generations ago from Denmark. So you'll be around that area.
I mean, I will confess, I'm not a traveler by nature. I'm really, I'm kind of, I like going to conventions, but the physical getting from place to place is and certainly the faff about flying places, good Lord, and how early you have to turn up and all of that sort of thing. I find it incredibly stressful.
It's like, I got to be there when?
Yeah.
Understandable for sure. So yeah, I would absolutely love, and me and my wife, this is one of our goals because we're done having kids now. 4 is plenty for anybody wondering. I promise. So we're going to try to hit, if we can only hit one, that's fine. Convention this year. We both are looking forward to that. And I'm excited for you, Adrian. That's going to be incredible. So I always love to ask near the end of the chat, who are some people important to you or who you like to listen to, who you would recommend I chat with in the future? Who would be a few people you would recommend?
Okay. Well, I mean, I genuinely think that we are in right now we're in a golden age of genre writing. Not least, I think, because we've got a diversity of voices in the genre that I don't think we've ever had in the past. I mean, I think you could do a lot worse than getting on, say, R.F. Kuang, who her book Babel was one of my best reads in the last couple of years. British, I mean, obviously most of the authors I know particularly are British authors. So I don't know if you know Gareth Powell. He writes some fantastic space opera. Aliette de Bodard is an incredible, she's a French Vietnamese author. She writes both fantasy and science fiction that's absolutely excellent. Tade Thompson is another Clarke Award winner who writes some really, really often quite bizarre and unique sci-fi. And as a fantasy author, R.J. Barker, who is actually local to me here in my part of the UK, but he's I think Gods of the Wildwood is his new one out, but he writes his Bone Ships trilogy is amazing.
Yeah, the Tide Child trilogy. Yes, it is. It's great. Oh my gosh, I'm very excited because I don't think you know this because I didn't mention it, but one of my newest loves is space operas. It's never something I thought I would be so enthusiastic about, but I am. And Christopher Rocchio in particular, the Sun Eater series. Have you read that series?
I've certainly heard of it. I've not picked it up yet. My reading speed has nosedived over the last few years, sadly.
I totally understand. And his books usually take me a few months to get through because of that same, I'm the exact same. But what I do experience, and a lot of the similarities I experience from your prose, is that ability to take me in a place I never thought I could go with just the written word. It's an incredible talent. And I really think it's a superpower. We have real life superheroes here, people. I wanted to throw out this comment, Poppy. In concern to the zeitgeist, would you say that some trends come around in cycles in your experience? So if you write your best book, the market will come back around, even if now is not the time?
Trends do. The problem is there's a lot of variation in what that trend will look like the next time it comes around. So I couldn't absolutely guarantee it, but it is entirely possible that that moment will come when the book you've written is just absolutely what publishers are looking for. You see there are a lot of particular pendulums from sort of grimdark to hope punk, and from sci-fi to fantasy, and things. There's always something going up and something going down, and but also, one thing I would say, nobody knows what is going to be the next thing.
I think that's very important.
And publishers can pick a book to publicize, and you do learn that actually having the weight of a publicity department, if you're lucky enough to get that, actually makes a lot of difference, because it impacts on things like Amazon rankings and stuff like that, and that really does fuel your book getting in front of people. But whenever the next big thing has turned up, whenever a book has done, Legends and Lattes, Travis Baldry. If you had told, I suspect, anyone in the industry that this would be the big book of the year, they would have just stared quite blankly at you, and yet it absolutely was, and it came from left field, and suddenly that is almost like a new subgenre has been built around Travis's success.
Yeah, cozy.
And we will see an enormous number of people trying to get on that bandwagon. Romantasy is another current boom. But and again, I think if you told people a few years ago, oh, this is going to be the next big thing, they would have just been really rather dismissive of it until it happened. If publishers knew what was going to be the next big thing, then they would have an infallible sales record, and actually far fewer books would ever get published.
Yeah.
So you never know, basically, what might hit the imagination, or you never know whether the thing you're writing now that you submit next year, that comes out the year after, might suddenly find itself on that sort of rising tide that no one had any inkling about when you were writing it. It's such a, I mean, in the same way as all creative endeavors, but I think possibly more than most because of the weird slow burn timescale that a lot of these things work on. It is such a weird business.
That's another one of my new current loves is when I never thought I'd have is those slow burns that take you. It's slow at the during certain parts for a reason, and for me, what I love is that world building, those characters that you begin to know through dialogue, and it's very exciting. Josh Eat Books said absolutely. He says Shadow the App will translate very well to screen, maybe even a video game. Let's make it happen, Adrian. Is that something that's possible?
I mean, speaking to anyone who's watching that has the power to make it happen, the rights are out there. Come drop me a line. I mean, the thing about I would love. I mean, particularly, I'd love like an anime style cartoon of Shadows of the Apt. I think it's got a lot of the elements you see in anime that would work really nicely. I have no power to make this happen. I have no leverage on that. I would love to work with someone to make it happen. There's a huge amount of material in that world just waiting to be tapped. I've had a few things optioned in time. Nothing has they've kind of these things come and go, and authors will tell you, and anyone will tell you, that's how it goes. Someone will turn up and they'll be phenomenally enthusiastic and they will give you some money, and then you will possibly never hear from them again. Or they will occasionally come back and be very enthusiastic about how it's all going very well, and then they'll go away and you'll never hear them again. And eventually the rights will revert or be renewed or whatever. But it's just one of these, it's something, it's almost kind of like aliens have come down and they've explained to you that they're going to do this wonderful thing, and then they go back up in their flying saucer, and you spend a while watching the stars and thinking, oh, wonder if they'll come back. And then eventually you get on with your life because, it's just like these things are happening in another world almost.
I definitely can see that from my perspective in so many different areas of entertainment, especially. Ryan Skeffington, a wonderful sci-fi author, very good guy, wonderful writer. He asks favorite anime.
Oh, I'm gonna cheat slightly because I think what I'm saying is not an anime per se, although in my head at least it fits into the same general category. I'm not a very deep anime aficionado, so I know there are colossal amounts of anime that people are very, very keen on that I haven't really sampled. I thought the animation Arcane from a couple of years back was one of the best things I have ever seen on the screen. In writing, in characterization, in voice acting, in soundtrack, in music. I mean, I bought like 3 volumes of soundtrack of that, which I use as writing music. It was such an amazing show. I'm aware that it took many years to make, and I'm aware that it'll be a while if we ever see another one before we see it. But good Lord, it was worth it. It was an absolute tour de force by everyone concerned. I'm
very excited to try. I have not picked that up before, and I'm very excited to now because there's not many anime I feel like I would be interested in.
It's one of those things until you start to test the waters. I think one doesn't realize necessarily just what a colossal range of material is covered under. I mean, even just in traditional anime is. We see a very small fragment of it over in America, in the UK. There's actually, there is an enormous range. It's in the same way that like comics doesn't mean superheroes. What we think of, I think, as anime doesn't really even scratch the surface of what there is out there.
This is a wonderful question, and you kind of stole it because that was one of the last ones I was going to ask you because I find it highly valuable. Are you a plotter or are you a pantser?
By nature, I am a plotter, but in a slightly variant way. As I mentioned before, I start with the world, or usually what I want to do with a book is I want to tell a story about the world. So I will create the world in quite a lot of detail, and then the world will tell me who the characters are, and the world will tell me what the plot is because I will see who are the interesting people, where are the kind of the flashpoints, what are the interesting stories that will showcase this world for my readers. But normally I will then go away and just plot everything out chapter by chapter, beat by beat, and have a very clear idea of where the book is going. And that's still what I do with most projects. However, the fantasy work I'm currently doing, which is started with City of Last Chances and House of Open Wounds, came out in the UK at the end of last year, and in the US I think it's March. I'm doing this rather differently. I'm making the world, and then I'm basically just following the characters around and letting them get on with it, because I'm trying to tell a ground level normal people slice of life story in a very dangerous, very high magic world. And that seems to work really nicely. It's a bit hair-raising because I don't know if the book is going to run to like 500,000 words or something crazy. But so far, the plots have sort of pulled themselves around. I've written 3 in that setting so far. And it's enormously fun just basically to skip from character to character and weave this mosaic of intertwining lives within whatever, a city or within a military camp or whatever I'm taking as my my canvas. And not really know what they're going to do, just kind of know what their start state is, and then let them run in my imagination.
That's very helpful to me personally, and I want to say why. I tried the pantsing thing. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do that. Nope, not me. I cannot keep things cohesive at all. So I'm so appreciative that you took the time, especially with the interruptions and stuff, guys. I'm really sorry about that. And the opportunity to talk to somebody I look up to so much and love reading so much just was it was an honor. So I wanted to say thank you so much, Adrian Tchaikovsky.
Well, I mean, thank you very much for having me on the show. It's always extremely pleasant to be asked.
I love it. Talking about sci-fi is like one of my new favorite things, and I never thought I'd love. So, man, it's been an absolute blast. And I would just, again, thank you guys who were here live and got to experience one of the coolest things I've ever done. Talking with one of the coolest authors. I absolutely love your stuff, man. I'm sorry if I'm gushing, but thank you guys for being here. And y'all that watch in the future, thank you so much as well. And I'm trying to think. I always do this, by the way, where I forget who I'm chatting with next. I don't believe my next one's for a couple days. So it's in my Discord. That link's below. Share, like, subscribe, all that stupid YouTube stuff that we have to say. And Adrian, I hope you have the best night, man. And thank you so much again.
You too.
See you guys.